Welcome to the next interview in our speaker series put on by James Madison University's School of Professional and Continuing Education. I'm Kai Degner, and I am your host. We are launching an online learning community called the Leadership Education and Development Series. So that acronym is LEADS. And what we really believe is leadership development is a lifetime effort, and leader development ought to be accessible. And this speaker series is a way to give the people tuning in a bunch of free content. You can sign up for the email list, get over a dozen speakers into your inbox. You'll also get all the bonuses, the links, the resources. You'll also get invited to the Facebook group where the discussion can happen between the hundreds of people that are tuning in to this series. This series has a theme, which is thriving in the new normal, what leaders should know to confidently lead innovation in hybrid and remote teams and organizations. That's a mouthful, of course, as are most things in higher ed. We are thrilled to have a very pragmatic leadership coach with us today. His name is Mark House. Mark House has been leading remote teams for most of his career, even as far back as the 80s. He blended together multiple facilities across the globe to ensure that IBM provided the space station's onboard computer, a PC in space, that is still flying to this day. He also was on the team that restructured a global technology company that was in 50 plus locations in 20 time zones into one cohesive product and engineering organization. Navigating multiple time zones, cultures, and priorities, some best practices are only enhanced now that we have more than telephones to connect. So Mark is going to get into this. His skills and his knowledge has been honed in the last 15 years of executive coaching teams and individuals through his firm, Empowering Leaders. He co-taught JMU's Leadership Communications class in the blended virtual MBA program from 2010 until 2020. He's recognized by the students for his very pragmatic insights. Many of them have gone on to C-level positions with their virtual teams that are now thriving, which is the whole goal here. Mark, what else would you say by way of introduction?
I used to have hair before I went through all of that. So there is a byproduct of getting better about leadership, which is not talked about a lot, but I appreciate the introduction. It sounds like I've got a pretty impressive background. Let's hope I can live into that a bit.
Well, we are the same. We've lost our hair for different reasons. Mine was probably mainly while I was mayor in Harrisonburg, but if I hadn't lost it then certainly the two kids I have that are younger than 3 right now have done the last thing. Somewhere in the middle is where the gray came from. But Mark, when I read this, I want to start with, what's the big deal here? You and others have been managing remote and hybrid teams for decades, way before there was Zoom, iPhones, smartphones, Asana, Miro boards, Microsoft Teams. Like, come on, what's the big deal?
I mean, honestly, that was the old guy voice when I was teaching in the MBA program, because most of those students were working in locations where their team was just down the hall, and they could walk down the hall and talk to people, and they thought that was the team they were going to manage for the rest of their career. And as you'll hear as I go through this, there's some basics of forming teams that are natural but not thought through until you can't do them. When you can't walk down the hall, when you don't have something in common culturally, when you're in a completely different time zone. And to your point, I started doing this when all I had was a phone, and I'm a raging extrovert. But how do you project your leadership brand without literally being there? That was a challenge I had to face. And I think there's some takeaway points from what I was able to figure out that applies now in this new hybrid world. So that's my hope.
And that's why we have you here, because you've been at the forefront yourself way before all these technologies were there on how to figure out these best practices. While, like you said, all you have was a phone, and we're not talking a smartphone. We're talking a phone plugged into a wall somewhere. And yes, hopefully somebody else is on the other end of that phone when you make the call. And you're also helping other leaders adjust through your coaching. So tell us a little bit, give us the big headline or preview of what you're going to get into, and then let's dig in.
I mean, I think the basic takeaway is there are some practices for forming a really good team, which very few people actually do. When they form a team, it typically is in the form of show up in the conference room, or today it's show up in this Zoom room. We have this big pressing business issue. Let's just jump in like on the raw meat and dive in. And the problem with that is in the formation model that I got exposed to, that's step 5, right? There's 4 steps you have to go through before you start actually working. And most people are so eager to get there that they fast forward past the stuff that actually makes the team work well and is sustainable. And when we've taught this, and I've done this with literally 100 teams, everyone knows that in advance. We set them up for it, and every team jumps to step 5, regardless of what we told them. So the first time we go through this, we pick a small problem so that by the end, they come back and universally they say, what have you learned? Don't start at step 5, start at step 1. And so what I want to do is go through those steps, give you some practical ways of doing that. And again, like I'll say this probably 100 times, this will work with teams of every type, but not many teams do it. And so whether it's hybrid or real or something, these practices are going to help you.
That is awesome. I can't wait. So step 5 is digging in or starting to work together. And,
Yeah.
and that's the wrong place to start.
Exactly. Yes.
So where do we start?
All right, let me jump in here. Start sharing my screen here. So people that know me know I love acronyms. So when Kai reached out to talk about this, I immediately said, all right, well, what can I come up with as an acronym? So the product here is called, you want me to lead where, which is literally the question that you should start with, but it's also going to build as an acronym as we go through this, hopefully.
Very
and I'll explain these
as we try and figure out where do we work.
So there's lots written about why teams succeed, and I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail, and I'll just warn you in advance. I talk fast and I don't read slides, but this will be in the leaf behind if you want to dive in. But acknowledge there's a lot written about teams. But the thing that's interesting is, and this is the model that I'll walk through, this is the 7-step model, and you see step 5 is the implementation. And again, I'll walk through this. This all made sense, and I knew all of this, and I had led teams that were built well and did well. But the problem is, and we even defined what a team looks like. So a team often is not a team. Obviously, it's just a group of people. But if you have these other conditions, that they're mutually accountable with a common purpose, set clear goals, and no talents on the team, that'll be a pretty good team. But now you've got to do it independent of location and culture. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this was clear to me when suddenly I was leading the team with these triangles, and that was me in the far left.
Just one clarifying question. When you say independent of location and culture, do you mean like independent of shared location or in shared culture?
Bingo.
Okay.
Yep. That's it. That's exactly correct. I mean, and so like the first team I inherited, I had people in London, England. And when I talked about football, they talked about that was to them what Americans call soccer, right? And so I had to figure out they loved cricket, they loved rugby. I'm like, I don't understand those. So that actually led me to learning and loving Formula One racing, because then we could talk racing when I would get together with that team. So you're right. You've got to intentionally develop shared meaning, shared culture. But the starting point is you may or may not have anything in common with these people. And so you named it earlier. So the phone I had, that's literally the phone I had. That was actually a nice speaker phone that has noise canceling, et cetera. But I was literally in Washington, D.C., which is the darker green one. And I had this team spread around the globe. How do I manage this? This was year 2000. Literally, that was the year this happened. So that set me on a journey of thinking about what is it that we do. So again, team leadership is something that we've studied. Many people lead by control, and that's this column on the left. But it really turns out that well-performing teams, again, whether they're hybrid, virtual, or in person, now we're learning all the elements on the right work better. And I think the gift that COVID and Zoom has given us is they've literally broken the column on the left. You can no longer do those things because you're not physically there. And so you've really got to be much more intentional about the commitment column, which is understanding how to communicate and lead without always being in control. Let me pause. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I'll take a moment to make some connections to some other speakers here. One, we did Chris Nolan, who was the writer and director of a movie called It's VUCA that came out this year. VUCA is an environment of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous context that you're facing. And he talks about that being negative VUCA and balancing that with positive VUCA. He also talks about being above and below the VUCA max line, and below the line is what you showed on the left, and above the line seems to be what you showed on the right. We also did, and I don't mean to bring this up too soon here. Jason Tanner, who's the CEO of Applied Frameworks, who teaches the Scrum product owner class that I'm in. I'm taking an advanced certified Scrum product owner. And I know that you have a lot of experience in Agile and Scrum. And I've just really found that practical tool set so important as we embrace that the right-hand column or being above the VUCA max line, because it allows you to be in that space, but be in that space with the posture of we're being experimental, we are innovating, if you will, we are trying things out as we go.
Yeah, I would just emphasize that's exactly the leadership stance that has been working for me for many years. If you act like you know what you're doing, oftentimes you're very rudely proven wrong. And if you start with really, we're making it up as we go, people will help you. And I think that VUCA, I was in a team that we were literally asked to restate 10 years worth of earnings at Freddie Mac, and we had 6 months to do it. And we ended up working 150 hours a week for a year. Do the math. That's less than 5 hours of sleep per week. And that VUCA world, again, I got to see people at the limits of human performance, break down literally. And what you find is that when you get there, again, vulnerability works. And Brene Brown has now turned this into a brand. But this idea, I think, again, with both hybrid and virtual teams, you've got to figure out a way to project that in a way that's real. And it's very difficult in 2 dimensions. So we'll talk through some approaches that I think will work. More questions you've got at this point, or?
Well, if you work 150 hours a week, that sounds very productive.
Yeah. No. Which honestly, that was the season I got an executive coach. So I'll tell that story towards the end. Remind me, because you're right. We get so caught up in doing that there's nothing left, right? And again, I could tell lots of stories on that. Let me keep moving here so we don't get too far afield from the topic. Okay, so again, this is the beginning of the acronym. So WHERE, you want me to lead WHERE. The W is who and why. The H is how. The E is engage. The R is roles and responsibilities. And then the last one is actually execution, which again pairs up with step 5 of the model. And again, as I said here, you can get lazy with this with regular quote unquote teams that are just down the hall. This is super critical when you have virtual and hybrid teams. And I'll share some best practices for each of these. This is also documented in a template that I'll offer to you guys, both in a Word document and an Excel/Google Sheets document that you can use with your own team. So let me just walk through these pretty quickly. So the first one is who. And again, people show up in a conference room and you're like, well, I know that guy, right? No, you actually don't, right? And so what we've got here is some structured questions to help you understand better who your teammates actually are. So the first one is what helps you be at your best, right? How often have you ever heard that asked, right? So, and sharing a peak performance, again, the science behind this is you're giving that person a chance to brag, which no one gets in the office. And now you're, as peers, you're starting to realize, man, this is a pretty good team. We've got some really interesting people here, right? People, process, customer delivery, and resources may sound familiar to you. That's called the balanced scorecard. Again, it's old, like me, but it helps you make sure as a leadership team, you're balanced in terms of what you're really going to focus into. And when you do the inventory of the team, you may find like you're missing people that are interested in people, right? Okay, so one of you then needs to make sure you bring that perspective to the team. Key talents, again, is something that you've got. I was with a team one time, and one of the guys literally said he was a registered international chess master, which of course was interesting. And when you got into conversations with him, you really had to bring your A game, because he was thinking through all of where, again, when you needed super analytical data done, that was the guy you would give it to, right? So these questions really help you understand better who is on the team with you. Let me pause here for questions.
I just think those are really practical. And I guess what you're suggesting, this is associated with step one. So
Yep.
The point is, if you're bringing a new team together that's going to work on a project, start here.
Yep, that's right. And the last question is super critical. And most people have a blank stare, but what would success on this project look like to you? And so now you have a reason, if they can figure this out, why that person is going to be motivated to help with this specific project. This will dovetail into the communications, but having people ask for, by being on this team or on this project, I'm going to get this thing, then engages them in a totally different way.
And that could be, I'd like experience because I want to grow my career and profession, and I might want to go into this type of role, or something else. But the point is, you're talking about personal benefit, personal buy-in.
That is it. That is exactly. It's beginning the journey of personal connection, both to each other and to the project. That's precisely correct. Okay, so again, this is a spreadsheet where you literally scribe out what people say, and you put this on a shared area where people can go back later and either add additional details or see updates in terms of what the team has. There's a secret code on the far left of those names other than mine. If you want to figure out what those are, send me an email if you know who those names actually are. Do you know, Kai?
Not off the top of my head.
I'll tell you at the end. So that's part of my other side business, leading with music. I always weave musicians into things. All right, so why has this team been formed? And again, what you're typically told is not at all what needs to be done, okay? And so again, having the person who's commissioned this team come together and talk for a moment to the team, but actually have the team ask the sponsor questions. And so again, I facilitated this in multiple ways. Probably the best way to do it is split some time between the original introduction by the sponsor and the team coming back with questions, because you're going to need time for the team to really dig in and realize, wait a minute, I don't understand this, right? And I think it's important in the team to set up that so that people can ask stupid questions and understand. No one really understands what's being asked of. And then when they engage the sponsor, be ready for the fact that they may not know either, right? So go ahead.
Let me just do some jargon alert here. If you're
Perfect.
not a seasoned project manager,
sorry,
and you don't have a certification in, from the Project Management Institute, if you want that, we offer that training through JMU SPCE, and we have a new Foundations of Project Management and Team Communications class that we're launching this month for this audience. And you don't need to go through all that to understand the importance of what Mark just said. If we define it in 15 seconds here, the project sponsor is somebody that's powerful in the organization, that is probably funding and resourcing a project, but is likely not going to be in the weeds of making it happen. So they assign a team, and what Mark is saying, to a particular goal or project. But Mark is saying that project is not often exactly the way that they describe it on the front end, is not always all inclusive of everything that's needed to be done, or what ultimately is how it manifests. What else would you add to that?
The only other thing I would say is I'm spending a lot of time talking about project teams. There are many times where this is your boss, right? You're on a group. This is your supervisor. They're the leader. and they act like they know what they're doing. Okay, so it's not just these temporary teams, but in project groups that are persistent, the same idea holds water, right? And sometimes, again, the community I think we're talking to are the leaders themselves. Recognize you may want to empower the people on the group you manage to actually help you be a better leader, which means they're going to be empowered to ask you what you think are stupid questions. And I certainly went through this transformation where I realized I was a terrible delegator because I had all the stuff in my head, just like happened here. I know what a project sponsor is. I didn't say a word about it, right? And so recognizing if you're growing your team's ability to ask questions, the whole group is going to benefit. So on both sides of that boundary, wherever you find yourself in the organization, be willing to empower others to ask questions and be willing to ask those questions. That's what this why phase is all about. I mean, and if go ahead.
Yeah, this is just very practical. And I love the idea of talking about a project sponsor, both in a traditional project management context, but also it doesn't have to be that. The concept is similar if you're not a projectized organization, but you have somebody with power assigning a person or a small team to go do something.
Good. All right, that's good. That's good stuff. Let me go back to this then. Okay. Okay, so why are we a team? Again, if you get there, you have explicit assumptions and clear goals, and you'll start working on roles. Okay, that's the how, right? So how are we going to do this? And again, you'll not be surprised. I've got some specific questions we've come up with here. And again, people don't think about this. Okay, so we're a team. What the hell does a team mean? I was with a group one time that was a very low performing team, which is why I was there. Right. And I asked the question, I said, how many people here have been on a high performing team? And less than half the people raised their hand. And I said, anywhere in your whole life, sports, church, whatever, no one else raised their hand. So over half the people in this group, when you say the word team, it translates to dysfunction. And that really rocked my world, right? So thinking about, because I've been on so many high performing teams, I took it for granted that people liked being on teams and would benefit from being on teams, right? And so spending some time to understand, wait, what are the operating principles that we're going to be doing together? And this idea also of understanding how we now, knowing each other, how are we going to support each other? How are we going to celebrate this? What are we going to be willing to do for the team? And what are we willing to do for the leader, right? And so the rest of this slide is all specific details from that 7-step model. I might as well name it. I meant to do that earlier. That's the Drexler-Sibbitt model of team formation that is currently being marketed by a company called The Grove. There's notes here that I'll share with you. It's not sold or marketed very well. Most people are more familiar with the Tuckman model. I think this is vastly superior because it gives you clear diagnostics of if you're in this phase and you've made it through, this is what you will see. If you're in this phase and you haven't made it through, this is the types of symptoms that you will see in your team. And I'll walk through this with the chart here in just a little bit. But the how phase of forming a team, again, we typically just flip past it and don't really stick with it. Let me again pause here for questions, Kai.
I just think this is great. Yeah, keep on rolling. I hope people are appreciating the value, and I appreciate you being so prepared to deliver so much so succinctly.
So E is engage. And again, this is all about norming behavior. And again, these are questions that people never ask. Like, what's the best time to communicate with you? Are you a phone person? Are you a face-to-face person? Are you an IM person? Are you a text person? What is your expected turnaround time? Like, if I send you an email or a text, how long should I wait before I'm pissed off that you haven't responded? And what I have found in my coaching career, and as well as my professional career, is most challenges teams and people have are communication breakdowns. Literally, you have an expectation that I'm not meeting, but I don't even know what it is because you haven't told me, right? So like, I'm a super chatty email person, right? So if I don't hear back from somebody, then I get pissed off, right? Well, one of my direct reports came down the hall one day and he said, would you stop sending me so many emails? I'm like, why? He said, because you're my boss and every time you send me an email, I have to stop and read the damn thing. And so he was a very strong direct report, going back to good teams, right? I said, well, what would you prefer? He said, why don't you open an email and put all those random thoughts you come up with in the email? At the end of the day, send it to me. I'm like, that's a great idea, because I'm so ADD, I'll forget, right? So I did it, right? The end of the first day, what did I do? I deleted the email because it was all crap, right? Okay, but again, understanding how to have that conversation, right? This question in meetings, how will we know if you're engaged and participating? I did this with a team one time. I swear to God, the person said, I'll be staring at the ceiling. I'm like, could you say a few words more? He's like, I get distracted by people's faces. So if I'm really concentrating, I have to break that. And so I'll typically lean back and look at the ceiling. And the teammates that had been working with this guy for a couple of years said, oh, we just thought you were checked out and being rude. It's like, no. Okay, so explicitly, what can you be doing to let people know, no, I'm actually engaged, right? How much time can you commit to this project? That's another one people take for granted. If you've got somebody that's lightly loaded, guess what? They're going to carry a lot of weight. If somebody's super busy, they don't have the time for it. That mismatch then causes jealousy within the team if you don't explicitly. I've had teams where there's a mismatch of a factor of 10 between the time availability of people on a team. I've had people also say, I don't have time for this project at all. And so knowing that up front, again, if you hopefully you're getting the message, this is all about clear and direct communications. That then allows the team and the leader and the sponsor to figure out, okay, then we need to rethink this whole thing, right?
Yeah. And man, what kind of trust needs to be there for an employee to be able to say, I don't have time for this, when somebody else powerful or just somebody you don't want to disappoint is saying, hey, I need help with this. I mean, I just think it takes a lot to get to where somebody is comfortable saying that and have that be received well and constructively.
I mean, again, people hear me say this a lot. Let the process do the heavy lifting. Okay. So this process has a checklist and you go through it religiously and you're following the steps. And as the facilitator or whatever, you're just asking these questions, right? And that then lets the people kind of slowly opt in, right? And then I've had teams where I've had to go back to these answers because as they develop more trust, they wanted to change their answers. I had one team one time where a guy volunteered to be the scribe. He was terrible. He was a terrible scribe. So later I'm like, why did you volunteer? He's like, well, I felt like I needed to do something. So I did that. I'm like, but you're terrible at it. And you know that. Yeah, but I thought I had to say yes. Okay, so that's back to the trust. Now that as a coach told me there was low trust in the team, which was true, but we actually had an active conversation on exactly that topic. So having these steps be prescribed by somebody, you can throw me under the bus and say, hey, I listened to this guy, try this, let's do it. And then if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, you can throw me under the bus, right? But that process doing the heavy lifting is a lifelong learning of mine.
That's great. So we're at step 3 of the 5 in your W.H.E.R.E acronym that is especially created just for this interview. So this is the debut of the Mark House Empowering Leaders W.H.E.R.E model.
Yep, that's it. Let's power through the rest because I know people's time is precious. So that's engage. So again, formalizing communications, again, spreadsheet or a document, again, seeing this where people can track it. You can go update it later. Let me spend just a few minutes. There's some specific best practices around virtual teams. And I know that's most of the audience is interested in that specific thing. Again, most of these I would say are good for any team in any place. Have an agenda, make sure you have roles, which I'll talk about in a moment, timekeeping, make sure people are prepared. And then I just threw this slide in about telecom. Again, hopefully by now people have figured out how to do Zoom and other stuff, but it's good to remember, like you and I were trading emails before this, that my microphone didn't sound good. That's important to say because then I can fix it, right? Hopefully it sounds better today. But this idea of that the logistics and the mechanics are super important. I had a best practice when I was with teams to always have two completely different numbers where you could dial in. This is all pre-Zoom. Teleconference bridges where you could dial in and everybody could hear each other, but I always had two. I was on a call with my team, which again was that team that was spread all over the globe, and our number got jumped by noise. So that was a random call that was just flooding that with noise. But one of the people reminded me and yelled through that, let's all go to the other number, which we then did. We all went over to the other number and continued the conversation. So thinking through kind of the logistics now of being virtually connected, how do you manage that across the globe, I think is worth knowing.
That's great. I think the term telecom is even an artifact these days.
Yep, it is. I mean, but whatever. We're both old, so here, hopefully. So again, any team can have good ground rules. And again, virtually, it's important to then emphasize these as well, like sidebar conversations. What do we do about chat? All those kind of things. When I taught in the MBA program, it was fascinating. So it was virtual, right? So we couldn't see each other, but we could monitor the chat, right? And so the students, we had to remind them, look, if you're using the chat to talk about how bad we are, we can actually see that. So be aware of how you're managing the communications, et cetera. Rotating times is really important for virtual teams. I was leading or facilitating really 7 different teams across the globe one time. One of the teams that ended up being the highest performing and ended up winning this competition, they naturally rotated the team times because some of the team was in India, some of the team was on the East Coast, some of the team was in Austria. There was never a time when somebody wasn't up in the middle of the night, but they rotated the times such that everyone got a little pain and everybody got a little bit of pleasure. And you could tell when you dialed into that team, again, this is all pre-Zoom, that the team itself just felt different. Like they caught each other's back, they had jokes, they felt good. Not surprisingly, the results of that team were far better than everyone else. So the roles is another R, and this one again is a personal passion of mine. Again, back to the poor person who calls the meeting to call the project together. They get stuck doing 4 completely different jobs. One is just leading, one is keeping time, one is taking notes, and one is making sure everybody is participating. So other than that, and being the decision maker, no problem, right? Wrong. Okay, so what you've got to do is literally be explicit about dividing these things up amongst the people that are in the group. And again, a best practice is rotating these. So do it for a month or 2 and then change the role. So everybody is doing something different. Again, you're cross-pollinizing skills, but you're also giving everybody a place to plug in and participate and help this particular group be better. So let me pause there.
I love that a lot. It is difficult when you're calling a meeting because you want to talk about something or you're the manager and then you have all these responsibilities, and what can be done to delegate that opportunity, even as leadership development for others. We tried that on our team, which is a pretty small team, where, I was leading a lot of the meetings, but then we had others lead them. And it lasted about 6 or 8 months, and then we had to shift things again. But I really like that idea of giving other people a chance to run the meeting, and it's a growth curve.
It's again, you've got to build trust. So again, in this same season, while I was managing these large these virtual teams, one of them in particular, I was on a call, and again, no exaggeration, that we were all in, there were 8 different time zones represented on the call, and including me. And I was the team coach, the leader of the team. We were at the point where we were trying to put together a briefing for the execs on what the team had accomplished. And he talked to the team. He says, I really need some help putting together the summary presentation. Classic crickets, right? No one speaks up because everybody's too busy, right? So he lets the silence work for a bit, and then he changes the subject. And then a few minutes later, he asks again. And now as the team coach, I particularly am tuned in. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens, right? Nobody volunteers. So I then step in and say, okay, Sean, where are you today? He says, I'm actually in Sydney, Australia. I said, tell them what I happen to know this, tell them what you're going to do in the next 7 days. He says, well, I'm catching a flight to Japan tonight, and then I go to Russia, then I'm in Germany, then I go to London, then I go back to Toronto, then I hit Dallas, and then I finally get home to L.A. in a week. I said, so how much time do you have to put this presentation together? He's like, I might have a little time on the plane, maybe. Again, silence. Finally, a little voice spoke up and said, I have more time than that. I'm happy to do this on behalf of the team. Okay. So again, even the leaders have to recognize you've got to ask for help. You can't bail the team out in terms of overcommitting yourself, right? And I think that's another big leadership point. People like doing all of this and being too busy because it's easier than actually asking for help from the team that you're managing.
Wow, that's an extreme example, but I'm sure in some corporate environments, that's probably how it is.
I would love to say it's an anomaly, but it is not. So roles is important. Again, this is another one. There's some informal roles that you can start to talk about. So these are the ones that I've just articulated. There's some best practices around this, but recognizing, particularly, let me play a thing out about the devil's advocate. Google's done research that they assigned a devil's advocate to every team. And the devil's advocate being there made the team better. The decisions that they made were better. And when they came to forming their new team, they were the first voted off the island because they're constantly being negative about what the team is doing. Now, again, it's a very fine and subtle leadership point, but how do you, and again, it's back to what you talked about, Kai, how do you develop the trust so those voices who are out there who are skeptical can actually help the team perform better, right? And maintain the ability of being connected to the team. So I think one of the things haven't done the research on what Google did, but my guess is that maybe those people didn't know the devil's advocate as well. And so it was easier to diss them because they didn't really know them, right? So the last piece, and this is one that's very subtle, is most teams do not spend enough time together. And so intentionally putting together a work plan where you're executing the plan. And typically what I try to do is mix in some of the formation work because about half the population are process people, and deliverables because about half the population are like, can we just get on and do the work, right? And recognizing you need to work with both pieces of that, right? So the process of working and the deliverables that you're doing, this kind of comes back to Scrum. One of the things that Scrum and the Agile Alliance and some of those organizations, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically iteratively working together. That's the way the work gets done. And you go through this loop often and you're honing in on what you're doing and how you're doing it, constantly balancing both. I'd love your thoughts on this one since you're in the product owner class.
Yeah, I mean, let's just point out again that you're saying this is the last E in the W.H.E.R.E model. So it's the last step, and it's the first step in what some people might define as getting anything done. And
that's right.
But you've set the groundwork of making meaning about the goals, individuals' performance, preferences, trying to set norms. You've shared some spreadsheets very quickly of where that's actually documented. So even going through those steps could feel like moving forward if you're facilitating it explicitly. And you can, with what you're showing visually on a screen, show progress along these team building steps that you're identifying here. And then execute is also not a in what you're showing here, kind of a waterfall model necessarily. It is an iterative model. So we do, if this is new to you, if agile project management is something you've heard, but you don't know what it is, or you've heard of Scrum, but you don't really understand it and it just seems like weird jargon to you, I really encourage you, just go on YouTube and Google something and watch it, or sign up for our Foundations of Project Management and Team Communications course, where we go over the basics of it. Because to me, look, I have an MBA, I have a integrated science and tech bachelor's, I'm through all the coursework in a strategic leadership PhD program. And I tell you what, none of those things have classes focused on how to build and manage teams. Certainly you are given class assignments where you sort of learn by doing, but none of it is really about doing the work. So to me, when I found Scrum and Agile, it just gave me a completely new framework and tool set to lead and to empower others on the team and to facilitate these types of conversations. So it's actually centers on people and process and information sharing.
Yep, that's right. That's exactly it. All right, let me power through the rest so we can have time for just a few final wrap-up questions. So this was the model that I showed earlier. This is the team performance model. And again, you've now seen sort of the first 5 steps of that. The last 2 I haven't emphasized because I didn't have any more letters in where, but
That's right.
they're also typically ignored. So making sure you recognize we're working well together. And then the last R is renewal, celebrating the success before you just move on to something else. But the model itself, you can see again, it's graphical. That's what Drexler did. Sebae was the PhD research on teams. It's aligned because it's easy to sort of digest in these 7 steps. To Kai's point, it implies a linearity of practice. That's not real. You tend to circle through different pieces of this. You can see if you've made it to this phase, what's resolved. And if you're seeing the things on the bottom part, that'll tell you you need to go back a step because you have some issues that are unresolved. And again, the model itself, there's a team performance model certification process that's offered by the Grove. I'm certified in that. I'm happy to talk people through it. It's particularly good in IT teams, which is what I tend to focus on because it implies a linearity of formation. And those people are very systematic thinkers. And so this helps give them it helps them understand why they're slowing down. If you just say slow down, that's not going to work. But if you can say, these are the reasons why we're slowing down, here's what we're going to get out of it. Tech people generically are like, okay, good, I get it. It's a process. It flows through.
Well, I'll find those links or ask you if I didn't find the correct links and make sure that those are in the descriptions.
Perfect. So again, just a quick wrap up. So again, where is why and who, and then how, then engage, then roles and responsibilities, and then execution. And again, the execution, I'll just put another commercial message, making sure you're spending time together as a team. People often ask me, when you do work at the C level, what do you notice? The problem with people at the C level is they don't spend enough time together as the C level. They all think they're running their own part of the work, and you can't. Like the CFO can't do the work without the CTO. And so at that level and almost all levels of organizations, intentionally figuring out how you're going to keep this team working together consistently, building that practice is a really important leadership point.
So I want to just emphasize another theme that's in your interview and the other dozen plus that are part of this series, which is there's no silver bullet and to figuring all this out. And if you're a leader or manager and you're having some sort of imposter syndrome where you're wondering, maybe you're not prepared for this, or you shouldn't be in the role because you don't know the secret sauce. And I just want to emphasize that nobody knows everything about how to manage their own contexts and people and goals. And it's never figured out. It's kind of endless work, which sounds overwhelming. However, if you can build these foundations, you can start creating routines and norms to build upon that empower your team and allow your team to be highly functioning and contributing to things in new and exciting ways. And the remote work is a new context for people, but it's not so different on the fundamentals of what it takes to get people working together and to create meaning and motivation and have clear goals. Like there are tried and true principles that many people, let's be honest, aren't doing well even when we were all in person all the time. So I think there's this misnomer that if we're in person, all these things sort of happen naturally because we see each other in the lunchroom. Maybe there's an element where that rapport building can happen, but if we're not being intentional about that, the being in person all the time is not a fix to everything that you've put in this presentation.
Yep, that's good. I'll just build on that. And that's what called me into coaching, honestly, is providing people that safe haven where they can out themselves and say, I don't feel adequate. And then helping them realize, actually, you are adequate. You have what needs to be done, and helping them then step forward into what they're doing individually and for their team to take advantage of the special sauce they have as them, right? We tend to underestimate what we do because it's normal to us. It is extraordinary to others. And so I think getting people to recognize and understanding that vulnerability is real, and you can manage it well if you're using it to build capacity in your team.
Well, let's transition into our shameless plugs and any listener thank you gifts you might want to offer, which you've alluded to here a little bit. So I'll model the shameless plugs and say that the JMU School of Professional and Continuing Education is launching 2 programs this month. One is the Innovative Leadership Program. That's in partnership with Maureen Metcalf, who is the first guest in the series, and she is the CEO and founder of the Innovative Leadership Institute. And it's about a 4 or 5 month program where you get to innovate on your own leadership, build your own self-awareness, grow as yourself as an individual in a cohort model where you're assigned readings, assessments. She has a free assessment. So we really hope people take advantage of that. So that's for you as an individual leader to grow. Then we have the new Foundations of Project Management and Team Communication course. And this is a course people have been asking for forever because we have a PMP and CAPM prep course and a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, but that was too much for a lot of people in a lot of roles. People just wanted the basics. We have that course. It's affordable. Sign up. It's all online. We meet Wednesday mornings for 4 Wednesdays, and we'll put the link in here. So check that out. Mark, what is your shameless plug? And if you have a listener thank you gift, please share it.
So again, we talked about my organization is empowering leaders. So that website will be in there. I have a hobby business that is also weaving together music and leadership. And so there's some wisdom there that it's delivered in 5-minute bites, including some pretty good music. I'd love to have you check those things out. And then I alluded to this. Let me just show you what this is going to look like. Here we go. So there's the team charter document, which again gives you sort of the steps of building a good high performing team. And it's got this in here. I also have this built out as a Google sheet, which I will have that shared. And then, as I mentioned, I talk really fast and there's a lot of words in these slides. So I'll make sure Kai has those so you can get a hold of those. And then just in terms of my own work, if you're interested in knowing more, particularly about executive coaching or leadership coaching for you or for your teams, that's what I focus on. I have a specific new focus on technology-based teams because that's where I come from. And it's a market that I love. And it's typically underserved when it comes to leadership skills. Back to Scrum, it really emphasizes more regular communications and leadership. That community typically has never had any training in that. That's where my specialty comes in.
That's great. So you'll give me the link to the document that you shared, and I'll just stick that right in there.
Yep,
Great.
That's perfect.
So how should people connect with you?
Again, I'm not LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach me because that's my marketplace, is mostly professionals. My websites, either one of them, you can get in touch with me through those. I'm on Facebook. I'm not a big active Facebook person. I have a Twitter presence, but it is mostly a write-only thing. I'll post stuff there. My music stuff typically is posted to Twitter, but LinkedIn by far is the best place to reach me.
And share your 2 websites real quick.
So it's empoweringleaders.com and leadingwithmusic.com. Pretty simple.
Yeah. Mark, I can't thank you enough. You really, I think, put a lot of work into this for this presentation, and I hope people will share this if they found it valuable, because it's a great overview, lots of tactics, but also big strategy. And just if you just listen to all this, don't do it all at once. That's impossible. Again, pick one thing to start with and something that relates to somewhere where there's maybe some stress or lack of coordination, and apply these principles into one area for a few weeks and see how you can make progress. So Mark, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to your continued support of leadership and for the individuals that you support and the teams.
Thank you very much, Kai.